Okay, so we're going to be talking about literacy foundations for English learners. Let me make sure I have my little window popped up. Okay, great. Okay, so our agenda today, we're going to establish kind of routines. Again, it's been a while since I did Zoom, so we're in this together. We can kind of talk about what works for you guys. Yeah, we'll talk about that in a second, kind of routines for Zoom. Learn a little bit about me, which you kind of already have. We're going to discuss how ELs kind of begin to learn and then go into the components of literacy and structure instruction for ELs. So kind of progress in that way. And then yeah, session routines. Again, it's been a while since I did Zoom. So I think our plan is to just put questions in chat if you have it, and then Dr. Gossip will let me know when there's a question. And yeah, this can be very low key. You can pause me at any point. Um, it won't stop my train of thought. Hopefully, like we're good. So just let me know. And then at the end, there's going to be a QR code, and it will have uh, the session. It'll have this presentation. It will also have any resources that I've used during the presentation or any resources that I think could be helpful for your teaching of ELs. So that will be at the end.
Perfect.
Okay, so kind of already said this to you guys, but Morgan Sperry, classroom teacher for 3 years, EL teacher for 4 years. I have been through letters 1 and 2, so I am letters certified. So a lot of what you will hear will be pulled kind of from my knowledge of that. And then I'm also Be Glad certified, which is a EL certification, and then co-lead of my EL team at my building. So we're kind of lucky we have 5 EL teachers here, which I know is very rare in the EL world. So kind of help lead that team. Okay, so kind of starting with the why. Why do I think it's really important? Why did my building think it's really important to do phonics and EL, and how did that all mesh together? So if we're looking at data specifically, in our fourth and fifth grade building, we have 1%, and this is a recent last week. 1% of EL students are on grade level for their reading per their beginning of the year reading diagnostic. So 1%, we have about 200 EL students. That's not very many. So we kind of noticed when I came into EL about 4 years ago, that there were gaps that needed to be filled. There were reading gaps that we were like, okay, this we can't continue doing EL instruction and can't continue doing even general education instruction without attempting to help in these foundation reading skills. And so kind of how we've tried to do that a little bit is we do 27 minutes of explicit phonics instruction per day. Like I said, I know it's really niche for our school that we get to do that. But I get to see every kid for 27 minutes to do that phonics instruction with kind of the EL emphasis. We have about 3 to 10 EL students per class, and I teach 8 classes per day. So that's kind of the breakdown of what my morning looks like teaching that explicit phonics. But truly, kind of our why was just we knew there was gaps that needed to be filled, and we were like, okay, how do we do it? And that's when I got letters trained. That's when I started doing my own research of how can we embed EL and phonics together. When I first started teaching, I came to Carthage because I loved the EL population here, and I had a teacher say, okay, to help them with reading, look at a book and have them guess what it says with pictures. And we know that when we know better, we do better. And so this is me knowing now with my training and trying to do better for these students. And that's kind of our school's why. We don't want them to guess. We know that that's not going to help them in long term. That's just a band-aid, and we want to address those foundational skills. So that's kind of our phonics structure at our building. And then just as a whole, kind of the EL focus. So this is from a book that will be referenced at the end of the session. But according to a 2017 study, ELs are the fastest growing subpopulation of students in public schools. I'm sure you've seen this in your schools. However, fewer than 3% of teachers have the specialized certification to work with this group of students. These numbers may have changed again. That was 2017. However, there I know from experience and talking to EL teachers, talking to gen ed teachers around this area, there has continued to be more EL students, but we're not getting more funding to get more EL teachers. And so even though, I mean, in an ideal world, everyone would be EL trained, they would be ready to come in and every gen ed teacher would have that. That's not our reality. And so my goal kind of with this is how can I give gen ed teachers, or even if you are an EL teacher, some of those steps to reach those kids just because of the numbers. I mean, looking at that, it's crazy that 3% of teachers are qualified. Okay, so we'll kind of start in how do ELs learn, and then I forgot to put a timer on. Jerry, will you, or Dr. Goswick, will you let me know when it's like, I don't know, 20 minutes left?
Sure, of course.
I can be long-winded. I'm sorry, guys. So hopefully we can stay on track. So we're gonna start where kind of how they learn, and then we'll kind of move into that foundation reading skills. So language acquisition is where they are accumulating that English. They're accumulating their language. For this, we need students to have opportunities to experience spoken word and reproduce the sound patterns in English or of English. So that would be your read alouds, your songs, your poems, your chants, so that they can start hearing inflection, tone, cadence. This is just that early stage. And when I think about this stage, I think about newcomers, but it really affects any EL, like if we're thinking about the stages of language acquisition, it affects all stages. And we just want to make sure that students are continuing to hear that language, continuing to hear language or English, so that they are developing language over and over again. I think about, I have a 19-month-old daughter, and she has more words. She had 3 words at the beginning. It was mama, dada, and Google. And which is so funny, but the reason why was because every time we go into the kitchen, I would say, "Hey Google, play Wheels on the Bus," or play Baby Shark, whatever, whatever. And so she started coming into the kitchen and saying, "Google, Google." That was her 3rd word. But because she kept hearing it over and over again, and she knew, okay, the Google Home means music, I'm going to say Google. She couldn't say all those things to me, but she knows that she's gained that language. So anytime students can hear that, is going to be helpful. So as they move through the progression of reading, they're still going to be moving through the stages of language. So it's not one or the other. It's not language or it's not language or reading. It's both. Like they are acquiring both at the same time. You have a question? No.
No.
Okay, it popped up in my chat. Whoops. Sorry, guys. Okay, so oral language development. Students need opportunities to speak in low stress and low stakes environments that fosters talking in any classroom. And emphasis here with accountability. And the next slide, I'm going to have you guys kind of look over some different ways that students, different strategies that students can develop that oral language. But just like the stages of language, they're hearing it, they need to be able to start producing it as well. So what I'm going to have you guys do is, I have a little, pause that. Here are some strategies for oral language development. What I would love, just to get a little interaction, is if you guys would kind of look over this. I'll set the timer for 30 seconds, and if we need more time, that's great. And I want you to think about what are ways that you already do these things in your classroom, or if you don't have a classroom yet, what are ways that you think you could do this, or what's maybe an important one that you would consider. So I'll just set the timer for 30 minutes, really just to let you guys kind of look over this, or 30, not 30. Oh my. Guys, I told you.
You're
Promise I'm not 80.
You're doing fine. You're doing fine.
For 30 seconds, and then I'll let you guys we'll kind of come back and talk about it. So 30 seconds, just look over those strategies. Okay, that was quick. Is there any, you can put it in the chat, you can turn your microphone off if you just want to spout out, that's fine. Are there any that you're like, yes, I use this in your classroom, and how do you use that in your classroom? Or if you don't have a classroom yet, what are ones that you think you'd want to use to kind of help that oral language? So I'll give you guys a second to do that.
So I can read some of the responses. Caitlin says she uses repetition in her classroom with ASL to help them cement certain ideas into long-term memory.
Oh, perfect.
I put in their building background knowledge. To me, if they have a background of what you're even talking about, just gives them 2 steps ahead of where you're going. Ms. Schneider commented, I always use sentence stems, 100%. That's my favorite too, to help ask discussion. So sentence stems are so impactful.
Yeah. A couple that I was thinking about specifically, those are amazing. I love that you guys are like already doing those things in your classroom. Something as far as practicing language, something I did in gen ed and that I currently do in my pull-out setting is I would do something called talking chips. So each student would get like 3-4 chips, however much conversation time I was allowing them to have. And then anytime that there was a talking opportunity, so partners, group work, even if it's out loud, my goal for them was to be able to talk. So if they added anything to the conversation, they'd put a talking chip in the middle of the table. And that kind of helped me too. If I walked around and I'm like, okay, this student only has all of their talking chips still, what are ways I can accommodate or make them feel more comfortable so that they will share? Maybe I need to do more partner work. Maybe I need to do where they're practicing more, where they're using those sentence stems so they feel comfortable. So that's just a way of kind of having that accountability of practicing. And then I think those sentence stems that you're talking about gives them a great way of having that low stress, low stakes. They can practice it with a partner, say it to themselves, and then say it out loud. So it gives them kind of that third time of, oh, I know I've said it, I've practiced it, I know how to say it, and kind of help lessen the stress a little bit. So I think that's a great way. Any other ones that you guys want to point out or something that you guys already do?
I think one of the easiest strategies is for us to slow down.
Yeah.
It cost us nothing. It's the easiest thing that we can do. Well, it's not easy to do, but it is something that's easy to implement. It takes time to implement, just to remind yourself to slow down. Adjust that rate of speech is super helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you guys will have access to this at the end too. So if you're like, ooh, I want to practice one of these tomorrow. I think the nice thing about a lot of these things is, like you were saying, Dr. Groswick, it doesn't need to be I'm spending money, I'm spending a ton of time. I can look at it and just be intentional and then practice that. I mean, tomorrow, today, if you're being in your classes at the end of today. So that's what I kind of appreciate about some of these strategies.
Exactly.
All right, so now we're going to kind of get into more of the foundations of literacy. As we kind of move through each section, if you have gone through letters, or if you have, I'm sure you may have done some training on your own as far as science of reading, you'll notice it's all science of reading backed. So you'll see maybe I pull a little part from letters or pull a little part from a curriculum I use. But that's kind of science of reading is the base of this. So the foundation of reading skills. We're going to start with the phonological awareness. So phonological awareness is the ability to recognize and manipulate the spoken parts of words. Those are the sounds. Something when thinking about accommodating. So, sorry, side note. As I go through this, even if you've had your own training in letters or you've done your own research, hopefully I can give you a piece of this is how it looks for ELs. And that's kind of the goal in this. So that will be kind of the focus of it. So when thinking about ELs in phonological awareness, they may have a hard time distinguishing between sounds in their first language and in their second language. It's important to keep in mind sounds that transfer in English and the language your students are using. So 99% of my students speak Spanish. So to the side, I put kind of different sounds between English and Spanish. Even just seeing this and when I'm doing progress monitoring or when I'm listening for students or we're doing a new sound and they're not grasping it totally, it may be because they've never heard that sound or their mouths aren't used to making that sound. And so it's important that you are aware of what the students' first language is, kind of when you're when you're going through it together. This is just going to help your knowledge of your student and knowing, they haven't heard this. Also, their mouth has never made that sound, and it will make a difference when you are progress monitoring and you are kind of looking at them compared to other students. Their development may look a little different because of the sounds just in general. So that's something to keep in mind when thinking about your ELs.
So last week,
oh goodness,
we were listening for that beginning sound.
Okay.
We're gonna do that again.
So you guys are gonna get to hear me
I added this piece
again. Nothing is like watching yourself back on video and being like, ooh, I sound like that. That's how I always feel when I watch myself. This is an example from my classroom. This was actually last week. And I was just like, hey guys, I'm going to record myself doing this. They said, great. So this is our normal class. Didn't do anything special. And for phonological awareness specifically, I have 27 minutes total. I spend about 5 minutes each class period doing this. It's very quick, very easy, but 5 minutes where I know we're going to focus on kind of that base of the sounds. So different ways you could accommodate for ELs. You could have visuals. Here I'm going to use 3 pieces of paper to kind of visualize so they can see it. They're listening, but they're also being able to see it. Depending on how much time you want to spend with your students, you could put pictures. So if I say the word butterfly and they have to repeat it, I could put a picture of a butterfly. It kind of just depends on how much time you want to spend on that. For me, it's 5 minutes, not super worth that, but if you're in a newcomer classroom where they're like super in that early language, it may be worth it. Hand motions. And then for this lesson specifically, if I wanted them to have more support, I could have sticky notes in front of them. Really, any tactile thing that they can use could be helpful for really any student. So I'll show you just an example of what it looked like in my classroom. Oh my, I keep doing the bottom. Here we go. You guys are like,
so last week we were listening for that beginning sound. We're going to do that again. But I added this piece because I think it's going to help us just a little bit do it, okay? So when I say the word, I'm going to touch the piece of paper when it gets to the beginning sound, the middle sound, and then the ending sound, okay? So I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. Okay. Say the word turtle. Turtle. One more time, turtle. 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 So I'm going to go turtle. What's that first sound? Good job. Say kitchen. 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 What's that first sound? Good job. Say review. 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 Woo. Review. What's that first sound? Good job, guys. Say dollar. 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 What's that first sound? Good. Say cookies. 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 What's that first sound? Good job.
Okay, Miss.
Okay.
We're at 10:22, so about 20 minutes. About
Okay.
10:45.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Any questions about that? Okay. Great. I'm going to try to fly on through. Okay, so phonetic awareness, then we move into our phonics. Phonics is the study of the relationships between letters and sounds. This is the meat, the base of what I do. So it needs to be systematic and explicit and should begin with the simplest phonics task, such as letter name, letter sound. Then it should progress to more complex skills as they master it. So the key here is to find their lowest level of deficit to help remediate those gaps. I'm fourth and fifth grade. If I was lower level, it would look they would still need to be lowest level of deficit. But with me, I have a screener that I give, helps me find their lowest level of deficit, and then that's the skill I work on with them. So I have an example.
I think I may have had a question. Jana, did you have a question?
Pardon me. I'm going to kind of type it in chat and it goes back to phonological awareness. So just go ahead, Morgan. You're doing
Okay.
a beautiful job. It's very helpful. But
Okay.
I do have something that we can pose later.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Jana. Okay, so this is an example of my coworker's classroom. They were working on the AU sounds. This is just an example of a phonics activity that you could do. This is from a curriculum that I use or that we use, but you can make your own. So let me just show you an example of what that looks like.
Nice. When do we usually see AW in a word? Nice. And when do we usually see AU in the word? In the beginning or in the middle. Good, good. Nice job.
Okay, so there they were just organizing the AW and the AU words into categories. So that was just an example of a phonics activity. Okay, moving kind of into the oral reading fluency. So we have phonological awareness, we have our phonics. Fluency is where they get to when they kind of have some of those other key pieces. They need to be working on it, though, but they can't until they can put words together with sentences with paragraphs. So that's kind of my students. We're leveled in my building, and my students are kind of the lower end of their reading, and we still work on fluency even if it doesn't look like reading a whole passage. So different ways that we do this, and I do at least one of these per day, if not all of them per day. Sentence dictation, so where you say the sentence together and they repeat it back to you, or sorry, you say it and they repeat it. Teacher modeling, repeated readings, and choral reading. So I'm going to show you an example from my classroom. I may cut off a piece just for the sake of time, but kind of the goal of this activity that you're going to see is to provide a low effective filter and then support in that reading fluency. So even though my students are on that base level, we still want them to practice that fluency, putting words into sentences and into paragraphs together. And then if you're a notes person, this is just kind of the progression of what you're going to see. First, the students are going to read the text chorally. Then that means so we'll all do it together. Then I'm going to give each of them a sentence strip, and the original text will be left up on so I use a smartboard. It will be on the smartboard, and they have one in front of them. So we will be reading it back through sentence by sentence. They can reference their paper or the board. And then at the end, which you won't see this part, but we would read the text together with fluency all together. So something important in reading, something you hear a lot in letters, is the 3 reads protocol. That is a 3 read protocol. They read it once or twice together, well, actually all times together. But it helps practice that fluency, practice that inflection, tone, all that. So I'll go ahead and show you.
Okay, guys, we are going to read this passage passage together. We've been working on the beginning S blends. So we're going to read the passage together, and then we're going to do an activity with it. Okay? So we're going to start with the title. What's the title of the story? Tim's Bad Skin. So let's say it together on 2. Ready? 1, 2. Tim's Bad Skin. By, does it say an author? No. So it would be by unknown. So let's say by unknown. That just means we don't know the author. Yep, perfect. Okay, so let's read it together. You can follow along on your paper, or you can follow along up here, whichever one you like. All right, we're going to start together on 2. Try to stay with us. Don't go too fast. Don't go too slow. All right, ready? On 2. 1, 2. Tim likes to jump and skip. Tim sees a brown stem with a twig.
For the sake of time, I'm just going to pause it right there. We go through the whole story together. So I'm modeling, I'm saying it probably louder than they're saying it. So I'm modeling that, and then pointing to each word so that they can see that. And then this is the second progression. So I gave them each sentence strips, and then we're going to place them on the thing in the back, whatever that thing is called.
Have read your sentences, you know what they say. I want you to make sure you're looking over them, because what we're going to do is we're going to start at the top, so you can use your paper as a reference for you to look back to. Your paper, or you can look up here. So I want you, we're going to actually read it together, and each sentence that we get up to, I want you to place it on the chart. So we can do the first one together. So what's the title? Tim's Bad Skin. So if you have Tim's Bad Skin, go ahead and put it right up here for me. Awesome job. I love how she put the title at the top. Usually when you're reading a story, the title's going to be right at the top. And who was the author, would we say? By unknown. So if you have the author or no author, go ahead and put that. We're going to put it right underneath that as well. By unknown. Love it. Perfect. Okay, so I love how they put that there. Now we're ready to go. Okay, so let's start with our first sentence. Ready? Let's say it together. On 2, 1, 2. Tim likes to jump and skip. So if that's you, go ahead and put it right up here. Right over here, because that's how it has the story.
Okay, for the sake of time, I'm going to pause it right there. But we go through and we then place the sentence strips onto the chart. And then after that, we would all read it together. So that's kind of the progression of that to practice that fluency. Any current questions?
Okay, so Jana provided in the chat, she said another consideration when teaching phonemes that values dialect, for example, EL or extreme demographic dialect, specifically teaching a vowel valley, is to teach and use anchor words for each of the English's 18 vowel sounds. Anything you want to say to that, Jana or Miss Berry?
I have heard of that personally, but I've never done a training on it or done that. I think I've heard of it and I heard it's great. So thank you for that input, Jana.
Yeah, it's called a vowel lexical set.
Okay.
And it is so important because, again, as you say, with Spanish, they have 5 vowels that make 5 vowel sounds, and the same vowels that we have, but their vowels make different sounds. 3 of them make different sounds. And so this one is just real helpful. So for example, no matter what, for a short A sound is ah for us, like ah as in apple, but they might say it just slightly different. And so give them a word, and the word might be trap. So a specific word of which there is a very pronounced vowel sound and distinct vowel sound for that short vowel, that's their trap sound. And so that represents, the word represents the short A sound. And even if it's slightly different than our ah, it's consistent with any word that would have a short vowel A in it.
Okay. I love that.
Yeah, it's really powerful. And I'd be glad to share with you a slide that I put together for that. So
Yeah,
it's
that's
pretty
great.
cool. I actually think maybe I can put it into chat.
Yeah,
Okay, that'd be perfect. Thank you so much for that insight. I love
Oh, you're
that.
welcome. And thank you for the work you're doing.
Yeah. Okay, so to kind of finish up, got a couple more things. So moving on to vocabulary. The reason it's kind of progressing like this, and there's a reason it's kind of towards after phonological awareness, after phonics. I feel like when anyone hears an EL, they're like vocabulary, which absolutely I would agree. When we have gaps in vocabulary, they can't comprehend a text and they can't um, understand what's going around them. That is one of the base things that we do. However, when it comes to reading, again, like I had said about the picture, we can't just focus on only vocabulary. We have to make sure they're getting those foundations, and vocabulary is one of those foundations. It just can't be the sole thing. But vocabulary is the word knowledge. Word knowledge is important skill for reading comprehension. Vocabulary is directly correlated with the student's ability to comprehend the text. Already had said that, but that's yeah, it's important that students understand certain words in a text to even start to comprehend it kind of after they've gone through those steps. So I'm going to show you kind of how you can teach it explicitly. This is just one of the many ways. Vocabulary is amazing, and there's so many amazing resources out there to teach vocabulary. This is just one like explicit way. We have these in our classrooms. The left picture is one that is in our tier 3 pull-out classroom. We're teaching prefixes just because we thought it would be more bang for our buck because we're not working on a certain text. On the right side, that is a general education classroom, and they're working through a unit. And so they were pulling out vocabulary words from a unit. Notice on the right one, there is an English, and then there's also Spanish. And so that's kind of bringing in some of that. Has the definition, and then a sentence. I don't really know what that third one is, but on the last one, it's a sentence of how it's being used. Obviously, I would probably add a picture if I was that person, but kind of depending on if you're using it for filling in a gap, filling in like a tier 3 or tier 2 language gap, I would maybe do more of like the left side. But if you're using it for a unit, I would probably look more like the right side. So it's kind of just split up in the word, meaning, picture, and then usually a sentence at the end. So that's kind of an explicit way of how you could teach it. In a non-explicit way, that same passage that you saw me working with in the students for the fluency, I just gave them pictures of some of these words and we placed them together, and that way they could have a visual. And so this was a very easy, took 5 seconds to place those on, but now they could see a visual of what is a stem, what is a twig, what does snap mean, because that's a multiple meaning word. So it could mean multiple things. So that's just a small non-explicit. You could add that to any passage that you're reading and have that on there. So just wanted to show you guys a little example of how I use that. And lastly is reading comprehension. That's a big one, especially for our ELs, and asking questions and getting a response that is grade level can be tricky, especially if they don't know how to read. And so I'm going to show you kind of that last point there, leveled questioning. I'll show you how you can accommodate for your ELs. But in supporting reading comprehension, you can establish multiple meaning words. So I had talked about in the last slide, snap. They may have heard snap, but they may have heard snap like this kind of snap, or someone snaps, they freak out, or the snap of a twig. That's English is so tricky because it's spelled the same and there's 3 different meanings. And so pre-teaching those words will be very, very helpful. Even just adding a little picture like I'd kind of done, or having them draw or annotate on their page would be helpful. And also establishing any of those unknown vocabulary words. Like I talked about with vocabulary, they can't understand a text if they don't understand some of those key vocabulary words, especially if it's a unit and it's specific to that unit. Academic language, they're probably not going to understand. So adding pictures, making sure they understand that beforehand. Also making sure they understand story structure. So depending if they're doing a narrative, informative, that will be helpful too. There's probably way more I could say about that, but that's just a little plug right there. And then the last piece is leveled questioning, which is where I'll spend the rest of the time. So I have, which my picture didn't pull up, and that's okay. It was a picture of the stages of second language acquisition and then tiered questions. However, I have this tiered questions right here. And then in the resources, it'll have that picture in there. So it just didn't pull up on here. But when we're looking at where students are in their language, it is helpful to maybe level out the comprehension questions you're asking them because you want them to feel successful. If you're asking an open-ended question each time, kind of like if you're thinking about DOK levels, if you're asking the hardest one each time, some of your ELs aren't going to feel successful and feel kind of bummed when they can't answer or shy because they don't know the language to use. And so this is a way that you could honestly split up your kids. And that's what once I progress monitor them and know where they're at, split them up and, okay, these are my ones, these are my twos. And then when I ask them a comprehension question, I ask them in this level. So number one, that's just point. So if there's a map, if there's a story, point to the word that said snap. Point to where it talked about Janie. I don't know. But that's kind of a lower level. Number two, yes or no questions. Number three, either or questions. And number four, open-ended questions. So that's kind of your higher level students who are ready for and have more of that language development for that. Not to say that lower ELs couldn't handle number four, but like you guys had mentioned, kind of using some of those sentence stems, maybe giving them a word bank when they're talking, that could be more of how you could get a number four. But if it's more of just, I want to know, do they know this from the story? Feel free to level the questions because they're still showing you what they know. And so that's kind of the important thing of doing the level is they're still showing you that they know this. Okay, so that's the resource QR code. That will have all that there. Has my email on it. If you ever have questions on, how I do what I do, like I said, I know my school is very niche that we have 5 EL teachers. I'm very, very blessed by that. Yeah, but if you have any questions, let me know.
So I did actually have a question about, you do all of the choral reading process in your EL course time. Do your content areas instructors do that as well? Do they take the time to read it as a group and then kind of do some of those same patterns, or is it primarily just done in the EL classroom?
Yep. So that's the goal, is that they use those. And we actually have a coaching model where in the afternoons I help coach general education teachers. And that's one of the first things I'll do with them, just so they're doing that language. So, or practicing that. It is a goal. Not sure if everyone's using it, but yes, it is the goal and purpose because it is such an easy thing to add in there.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you.
Mhm.
Other questions? Thank you, Jana, for providing that resource
Yeah.
in the link. So Dr. Heff said, thank you, Morgan. What a great presentation, which provided a lot of great strategies to help our ELs. She's from Monette. I'm looking forward to sharing the recording with others in our Monette district.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.
So Morgan, I have a quick question about syntactical awareness.
Okay.
How is it that you embed that within fluency? Because that's so important with EL.
Yeah. So I use, and it's a term that I'm taking from a term I'm taking from a training I've had. It's called a sentence patterning chart. And some things that we will do is break up, like let's say I'm looking at a poem or I'm looking at a passage, and we'll kind of break up where's the nouns, where's the adjectives, where's the prepositional phrases, and then we put it into a chart so they can kind of see that syntax of what are the order of how we do it. I can send you kind of what that looks like a little bit. It's kind of a bigger beast, but that's just a small way that I'll do that, is use a sentence patterning chart and kind of work backwards a little bit.
Well, and that's real interesting too, because we are kind of getting back to sentence diagramming in a way. And so I've heard of a syntactical tree, and I'm beginning to embed that into my own letters training as well. So I'm sure it's probably pretty similar to that. But again, thinking about EL, that's something that I'm trying to build my expertise with because I don't have a lot of experience with EL. So thank you so
Yeah.
much for
Yeah,
sharing that.
The whole word method to teach phonics and vowels. I don't know if I know what that is. Do you want to explain what the whole word is? I think Kyle had said that.
Yeah, while we're waiting for that, I was thinking about when you were talking about the phonemes at the very beginning, children, they acquire their phonemes up to about like 6 months of age. So if you haven't heard a phoneme within that first 6 months to a year, it's very difficult for you to acquire that phoneme after the fact. When I had students from China, they would really struggle with the and the They couldn't differentiate between rake and lake
Oh, okay.
at all. And it's because that phoneme isn't within their language. And so even a student that had been here for years still struggled with, he would say, I don't hear the difference between rake and lake at all. And so I think that's really important to understand the barriers, because you can literally Google which phonemes compared to English are a struggle that aren't in a language. And that's a really nice chart. I'm glad you put that up at the beginning. It's very helpful.
Yeah.
Hello.
Oh, there's Dr. Karami.
Yes, hi. Thank you for your presentation. So the whole word method is kind of against, on the other side of the phonics. So when you teach phonemes using like what you said, you have to start from the bottom to go up, you start from letters to go and teach words. But the whole word method focuses on the words first. The students learn the word, how to, they see the word many times, and then when they're ready, you go ahead and start, teaching the letters and vowels and everything. So the phonics, based on research, is more effective than the whole word method, but it can be used. The whole word method is good for visual learners.
Yeah.
And it's good for, those language learners who are at their basic level, like beginners. And it really works because, there are so many rules to memorize, if you want to teach, using phonics, and that makes it really difficult because they have to decode, the word in their mind. They have to process and then produce something, which makes it more difficult for them. So that's just a suggestion,
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm going to look into that. I have not heard about that, but no, I think that's a great suggestion. Thank you.
So we are exactly at 10:45 a.m. Thank you, Miss Berry. You did a fantastic job. We really appreciate you spending time with us today and just sharing. We love our partnership with Carthage, and we love to hear from you all what's happening in the district. So thank you so much for sharing, and thank you for providing the resource link. We'll make sure that this recording gets out to everyone attended, plus to you. So if you'd like to share it as well.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.